announcements to make, not a whole lot. Of course, let's remember all the sick in our prayers. Sister Debbie in the nursing home. Mom came through surgery okay on Thursday. Still in the hospital. Meredith told me yesterday she's doing pretty good. Tentative date yesterday, she might get to go home on Thursday or on Tuesday. So just remember her. I believe everybody here is aware that Cody and Alicia did have their baby Thursday afternoon. So I was laughing at Cody because I was looking at the bulletin that Buell sent me, and while I was looking at the bulletin that Buell sent me, Cody sent me songs today to be ready to lead singing for this morning.
Okay,
so,
which set did you put up?
Huh?
Which set did you put up?
Yours. I told Cody, I said, don't worry about it. You take the day off, and Buell's already on the bulletin schedule to go. So just let him do it today. So I think they're doing okay. Several gospel meetings coming up. I know Bonner has a gospel meeting. It starts today. It runs through, I think, Wednesday. There was another one, but I don't remember where it was at now. VIM lectureships ran. Sparta. Okay, that was the other one. BIM, Bible Institute of Missouri lectureships ran Friday, Saturday, and today. You can watch those on their YouTube page, on their Facebook page, if you want to go back and watch those. Remember, next week, we'll have a guest speaker, Brother Hunter Fox. It's one of the students we're supporting at Bible School in Springfield. Will be here next Sunday morning. I'll teach Bible class. He'll give us our sermon. And then Brother Casey Rice will be here to give a presentation about the school in the afternoon at 1:30. So make plans to come back for that and be here for that next week. Remember our lectureship coming up in June. Start thinking about that. There was something else. Maybe it'll come to me. I can't remember it now off the top of my head. Maybe it'll come to me. Is there anything else that I'm not aware of that we need to be mentioned of? If not, I'm going to ask Brother Kelly, would you lead us in a word of prayer, and then we will get started.
Yes, sir. Let's go to our Father in prayer. Well, gracious Heavenly Father, we just thank you for a beautiful day that you have made. Thank you for waking each and every one of us up. Thank you for giving us the right mind, the right heart, gathered to worship you, to study your word, get a better understanding. Lord, my God, as we prepare to learn more about you, learn what it means to be a Christian, what we need to do daily. Lord, my God, we just ask you for clears up our hearts and minds that we receive all the knowledge that you have to offer us. And Lord, we ask you to forgive us of any sins that we have committed, and that you would cleanse us and wash us and keep us holy. Lord, my God, as we prepare to continue to serve you, we ask that you be with us. In Jesus' name, we pray. Amen.
All right, 1 Timothy chapter 3. We're still in 1 Timothy chapter 3 this morning, and we're ready to pick up at about verse number 10. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse number 10. Still dealing with the qualifications of deacons now, and we looked at, over the last several weeks, we've looked at the qualifications of elders, and now we're looking at the qualifications of deacons there in verses 8, 9, and 10 here. Now again, several of these qualifications are repetitive of qualifications that we saw in the qualifications of elders, so we're not going to spend a ton of time dealing with some of them. There are a couple that are unique, as we pointed out already there. Likewise, when we get over to Titus, again, when we go through this again over in Titus, we're not going to spend a ton of time dealing with the individual qualifications in Titus, simply because we've already gone through them in regards to elders and deacons over in Titus. Likewise, deacons must be reverent, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy for money, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. Verse number 10. But let these also first be tested, then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless. So the next qualifications that Paul gives out there in verse number 10 is the idea of they're first to be tested. Now this is a phrase that is similar. You remember one of the qualifications when we looked at the qualifications of an elder back in verse number 6 was the idea of not a novice, not someone that is young, not someone that is a babe in Christ. This is a phrase that is similar to that idea. The qualification here is the idea of one that has been tested or one that has been proved or tried. In other words, this is one who can handle the responsibilities and can handle the tasks to which, because remember, one of the things we talked about last week was the differences between elders and deacons. We're not going to rehash that again today, like we talked about last week. But it's the idea, they're given this specific job. Now, let's just use this as an example here. Buell does a really good job in taking care of the finances here for the congregation. He does a really good job. Now, I'm going to be the first one to say, I can do it because I've done it. I did it at Crocker for a little bit. But if you had a choice between me taking care of the finances and Buell taking care of the finances, who's the one that has the proven record? And who's the one that can handle that responsibility better? Obviously, you're going to go with Buell. He's been tested. He's been proved. He can handle that responsibility. That's the idea of being tested. And the idea of being proved here in the original King James. These are the ones, they know what they're doing. You're not going to take somebody that has absolutely zero idea when it comes to social media and electronics and put them in charge of the website, right? Put them in charge of managing the social media accounts for the congregation, right? You're not going to do that. You're going to get somebody that knows how to do that, or in some cases has the ability to learn how to do those things. Also, remember, when we talked about this last week, the role of a deacon is often one of the first stepping stones or the training blocks leading into a role of what? Elders. Many times, elders were often at one time what? They were deacons before they became elders. Many, many times there. So this kind of stands as this testing ground there. Get your feet wet. You're not in charge of the leadership of the entire congregation like the elders are, but here's a specific task. Remember, we talked about the biggest difference between elders and deacons last week is the elders were in charge of the spiritual aspect of the congregation and deacons were in charge of the physical aspect of the congregation.
I think according to verse 9 that it should be also they have the spiritual guidance to be able to do what they need to do along with it.
Yes, when you pair that to verse 9, they understand the gospel. They have the spiritual guidance there to be able to do what they need to do. They hold fast to that gospel, that mystery of the faith. We talked about last week there being the gospel, and they want to stay true to that and hold fast to that and make sure that it's true and pure and uncompromising would be another good word to think about there.
But when you look at what was for the elders where they would not be puffed up. It could be used the same thing for the deacons because they get a job to do, but look at me, I'm taking care of this. Instead of saying, okay, this needs to be done for the congregation, let's get it done.
Yeah, let's get it done. Exactly, very much so. This idea of not being puffed up, and this idea of we're doing it within the confines of the gospel, and we want to make sure that everything we do, we have. I really like this sentiment and this idea of. I heard a lesson preached on it once, and it asked the question. The title of the lesson was, "Are we book, chapter, and verse people, or book, chapter, and verse Christians?" Well, just let me ask, should we be book, chapter, and verse Christians?
We should have book, chapter, and verse.
Exactly. We should. We should be able to back everything up with a book, chapter, and verse. Everything that we do is all. It goes back to authority. It's what it goes back to. Is the whole lesson was built upon authority. Do we have the authority to do what we're doing? And is there book, chapter, verse for everything that we do? And that's that idea and that mindset. Now, the other thing that really goes into this idea in verses 9 and 10, holding fast to the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience, but let these also first be tested, then let them serve as deacons. So in other words, in order to serve as a deacon, you have to have been tested what? Before you can serve as a role of a deacon. You have to have proved yourself that yes, I can do this job, and then you can serve as a role as a deacon. It's not the idea of somebody just comes in and goes, oh, I want to be a deacon, and takes over. No, you've got to prove yourself before you can fulfill that role, carry out that responsibility. And another thing that directly ties into these verses is this last qualification here, being found what? Being found blameless. Now again, we're not going to spend a ton of time dealing with this idea of blameless because we've already talked about it. It's the same word that's used back in, what verse is it in? Verse number 2. It's the same word that's used back in verse number 2 in dealing with an elder there. Must be blameless. A deacon himself must also be blameless. And again, it's that idea of being without fault. Without skeletons in your closet, so to speak. That's the idea of blameless. And the deacon there to fulfill those responsibilities as well. Any other comments, questions, concerns? All right. For the most part, that actually concludes some of the deacon-specific qualifications. Verse number 11 begins some qualifications that likewise their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. Let's break this down for a second. In the original language, if you didn't know, in your scriptures, when your words are written in italics, like that, what does it mean when your words are italicized like that? You know?
Weren't the original, but you're trying to use to make sense of what's there said.
Exactly. They weren't. There's not a word for it there in the original language. But when they translated it into English, it was added to help make sense of what was being said because it didn't translate clearly into English. That's what these italicized words are. So, when you go back and you look at this, this isn't specifically talking about just the deacons wives. This is talking about the wives of both elders and deacons. So this isn't a deacon-specific qualification. This is a likewise the wives of both elders and deacons need to meet these qualifications. And I think it's interesting that I think this is a qualification that sometimes we don't necessarily think about, is when it comes to leaders in the church, which we know leaders in the church are to be men, but still Paul places an emphasis on the importance of who's just as important as the men fulfilling their role as leaders in the church. Their wives. Their wives are just as important when it comes to them fulfilling that role. Likewise, their wives. The wives of your elders, the wives of your deacons. And he places some qualifications on them as well. Must be reverent. Must be reverent. The original King James Version uses the word grave there. Well, when we think about the word reverent, what do we think about? What comes to mind? What's the word reverent mean? It's the idea of dignified. It's the idea of serious there being carried out. It also carries with it the idea of being honorable. This is the type of person that should be at the side of an elder or a deacon in the Lord's church. One that is honorable, one that is dignified, one that is serious. That's the idea here. In other words, they look at things in life and they understand, okay, this is something that's important. Now, especially when it comes to some of the things, is how do I want to phrase this? Being the wife of a leader, an important role, yes or no? Yes, it very much is. Even in the secular world, how much latitude, how much visibility, how much importance is placed upon the spouse of a leader. And even in the secular world and in the political world, how much importance is placed upon the spouse of the leaders. Well, the same thing holds true in the church. So Paul tells Timothy that it's not just the elders or the deacons that have to live up to these very stringent, very high standards, but it's also their spouses. Their spouses have some things that have to be met as well. And they are to be reverent, not slanderers. Now, what does it mean to not be a slanderer? Exactly. Not a gossiper, not one that stirs up trouble, not one that builds a case based on false accusations. That's the idea of the slanderer here. Now, busybody would be another term that would fit on this. Now, I'm not going to say anything, but I imagine, you don't have to raise your hand, I would imagine every person in this room knows somebody who would fall into the category of a busybody. I imagine we know somebody. You don't have to say who it is. You don't have to. But yeah, I would imagine we all know somebody that falls into that category. I don't have a problem saying this because she's passed on. My grandmother was one of the biggest busybodies you would ever meet. She was in everybody's business. Boy, it didn't matter. She was into everybody's business. She always had to be the one that was in charge, and if you didn't meet with what she expected, you weren't right. It's the way she was. That's the type of person here that Paul is warning Timothy about. Don't be like that. This is not a characteristic that is to accompany the wife of a church leader. Can you give me a reason why? Why would this be a very important qualification for the wife of an elder or a deacon?
She has a lot of influence on her husband.
She has a lot of influence. It's a lot of influence on her husband, doesn't she? And that can be used to help get her way in church decisions. Another reason as to why I think this is a very important qualification is specifically elders, but deacons too, not so much to an extent, but specifically elders. How much information do they get about people in the congregation? When somebody has a problem, where do they go? Who do they go to talk to about that problem? Go to the elders and the deacons. If there's a problem in the church, even the Bible tells us, if there's a problem in the church, who do you go talk to? You go talk to your elders. If there's a problem in the congregation, you go talk to the elders. Right? Well, oftentimes, the only person that the elder has to talk to or the elder has to vent to may be his wife. So this instills this idea of, well, I can confide in my spouse an issue that's going on and know, is it going to get out into the public sector? It's not going to get out. It's going to remain confidential. That's the idea behind this. The church problems are going to stay in the church. And I am fully convinced that this is a problem that the modern day church has had issues with for a long time. We air our dirty laundry and our problems for all of the world to see. And the world sees always the bad and the problems associated with the church because it gets out. Problems within the church are to be dealt with how? Within the church, right? Did you have something, Ron?
You know, a person like that is also a wonderful resource to other ladies in the congregation who would feel more comfortable maybe going to speak to an elder's wife or a deacon's wife on a personal issue or something like that, which in turn the wife and husband can share that and still keep it confidential. But, you know, there's so many women, and this is a generalization, it's probably not true, feel more comfortable talking to other women about certain issues that are important to them may not be important to men.
Exactly. That's a very good point, Rhonda. She brings up this idea of maybe there's a lady in the congregation that feels more comfortable talking to the wife of an elder or the wife of a deacon. And then the wife can bring it to her husband's attention. It's a very good point. So I mean, it really helps build that confidential aspect here, this idea of making sure we're dealing with the church's problems and the church's issues in-house. There in this idea. So we make sure that, so Paul places these qualifications on the wives of the leaders of the congregation. And really it's just to make sure, we make sure all the bases are covered, that we understand the ins and the outs. Now, we also have this idea here, and I think this is something that maybe sometimes we don't necessarily keep in mind. Would the wife of a person not meeting these qualifications disqualify somebody from serving in a role of an elder or deacon?
Yes.
Exactly. I agree 100%. Yes. If the wife of a person doesn't meet these things, he's not qualified. And I think this is something that maybe we don't necessarily look at when we go to appoint elders or deacons. You can't just look at the man. We also have to look at his spouse. We also have to look, as we're going to look here in the next verse, verse number 12, we also have to look at their family, their children that are living in their household. How are they living their lives? Because he goes on there in verse 12, there let deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses. Well, that's almost exactly, word for word, the same qualification that we looked at in dealing with elders, isn't it? In ruling their own house, taking care of their own house. The husband of one wife. Almost word for word, identical to the qualification of an elder. So the spouses and wives are just as important as the actual elder or the actual deacon. Just as important. Now let's go back to verse 11, because we didn't finish all that. We talked about, likewise their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate is the next word there. Temperate is the idea, in the original King James there uses the word sober. Really, this is the idea of being in control of oneself. Being in control of your faculties, being in control of your body. You're sober, you're in control, you know what you're doing. In other words, you think before you act. You think before you speak. Would be a good way to think about this idea of temperate or sober here. You think before you act. You're in control of the things that you're doing. Now, this is another one of those qualifications. We've already talked about it in relationship to the elders. Would this be a qualification that would be applicable to all Christians? Yeah. We're to be temperate. We're to be sober. We're to be in control of our bodies, in control of our faculties here. So this is very much applicable to all Christians. And in the next the next qualification that Paul gives is faithful in all things. Paul, what do you mean when you tell them to be faithful in all things? Well, what does it mean to be faithful, first off? This is the idea, and the way it's constructed in the original language. This word, faithful in all things, is the idea of, of being true and trustworthy. That's the idea that's being brought out here. Being true and trustworthy. Now, why? Paul, why would that be an important characteristic or an important qualification to place upon the spouse, the wife of an elder or a deacon in the Lord's church?
Well, if you're not faithful to all things, how can you remain a Christian?
Exactly. You're not faithful to all things. How could you remain a Christian? You can't remain a Christian, because really, if you take this and you look at it in just its very basic, very generalized sense, here, faithful in all things, that means the gospel says we're to hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized, right? To be saved. If we're going to be faithful to those things, what do we have to do? We have to have heard the gospel. We have to have believed in it, repent, confess, be baptized. The Bible tells us that we're to sing, we're to pray, we're to partake of the Lord's Supper, we're to give of our alms, we're to learn in our worship. Well, that means that what do? We do, the Bible says jump. We don't say hi, we just what? We jump. That's the idea of being faithful. Now, there's the spiritual aspect, but this also carries with it, does it not, carry with it the physical aspect of she's a wife and she's faithful, whereas he is faithful to her as a husband. She not also faithful to him as a wife? Yeah, that's the idea behind this. Even in that bond of marriage, they're faithful to one another. That's the idea behind this. There's a lot of give in this idea of faithful in all things. This is really kind of an umbrella qualification here. There's a lot that goes into this idea of being faithful in all things. There. Verse 12. Let deacons be the husband of one wife, ruling their children in their own house as well. We've already hit on that a little bit today. We talked about it in regards to the eldership. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on this idea, but I think that here is one of those reasons I said we'd come back to this, because there are some that will argue that just because an elder or a deacon's wife passes away, they're still qualified to serve as an elder or deacon based upon the husband of one wife. And they argue they go back and they argue, so it just means a one-woman man. And as long as you don't remarry, you're still a one-woman man. Therefore, they're still qualified to be an elder. That's the argument they use. I don't agree with it. And here's why. This verse right here and others like it, when we get down into this, because how Paul obviously places an importance, if you're going to be an elder or a deacon in the Lord's church, there's obviously an importance placed upon that elder or deacon being married, right? Paul wouldn't give us the qualifications for this if there's not an importance there. So it's verses 11 as to why I believe if an elder or a deacon's wife passes away, they need to step down because they're no longer qualified to serve in that role based on verse 11. That's my belief. I don't believe it has anything to do with the one-woman man. I just think, well, they don't fulfill these qualifications anymore. They don't have that wife to help them. Yeah.
They cannot rule their own house well if they don't have a house to rule.
Exactly. So there's another reason there. So there's several reasons. There's also an element here that goes back, and I said we'd get back to this when we got to it. Go back to verse 2. One of the qualifications of an elder given in verse 2 is hospitable. Now, let's be completely honest. When it comes to the role of who is the more hospitable one, when it comes to making sure if you're having visitors over, making sure the house is ready, making sure refreshments are prepared, making sure everything is ready to be hospitable to somebody, who usually fulfills that role? Is it the man, the husband, or the wife? It's usually the wife. There are a few exceptions to that rule where the more hospitable one is the husband, but in more cases than not, it's usually the wife that's in charge of this. I think back to my grandparents. My grandmother did all of the cooking. She did all of the cooking, all of the house cleaning, all of that. I was firmly convinced that when my grandmother passed away in 2007, that my grandfather was going to starve to death. Because the only thing I had ever seen that man cook prior was a piece of fried bologna. That was it. Now, he didn't even know how to make coffee, to my knowledge. It stands as a good example. Usually the one that takes care of the house and is more hospitable is the wife. So in my view, and again, this is my opinion, there's another reason that if an elder or a deacon's wife passes away, they don't fulfill the qualification of being hospitable as much as they should. Because more times than not, it's usually the wife that helps fulfill that role of being hospitable. So I don't go into the whole the one-woman man concept that disqualifies you. I think there's other reasons. And verse 11 being the big one here, that disqualifies one if a spouse passes away, disqualifies you from serving as an elder or deacon.
You've got the situation there too. If you've got a person, say a man, and a woman really needs some counseling, you don't want to meet alone.
Exactly.
You want to have someone else there, and preferably a wife that can meet with them.
Exactly. You don't meet alone. That was we had one of the classes we're given in school, and it's the only one that's offered every quarter in school. It's entitled Preacher and His Work, and it goes over different things. And one of the quarters was about counseling, and it's one thing it stressed over and over and over again, is if you have to meet with somebody of the opposite gender or the opposite sex, do not do it alone. I would imagine, Kelly, probably the armed services, you're told the same thing, right? You've got to meet with somebody of the opposite sex. Don't do it alone, right? Don't do it alone. Same reasoning here is why this idea, and I think a lot of times, a lot of people, and we can see it in the society that we live in today. We look at the church, we think, oh, well, only the men can serve in roles of leadership. Only the men can serve as preachers. Only the men can serve as elders. Only the men can serve as deacons. And I think people look at that and say, well, how archaic is that? And that's horrible. But here, when we look at this, how much emphasis is placed on spouses? There's a lot of emphasis and a lot of importance placed on spouses in fulfilling this role and carrying out this role as a leader in the Lord's church. There's a lot of importance placed on ladies as well. So definitely some things to keep in mind when we think about elders and deacons and their wives.
We have the example of Aquila and Priscilla.
Example of what?
The example of Aquila and Priscilla.
Aquila and Priscilla, exactly. There's a very good example. They worked together, a husband and wife team. They worked together. We even read about them over in the book of Acts, converting some people and having Bible studies in their own home, working together. I call it tag teaming. They were working together to convert and spread the gospel. A husband and wife team. There, working together, Aquila and Priscilla. We also see, and the idea that, I bring this up because it's one of the things we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Anyway, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but the idea that women cannot be teachers in the Lord's church is a bunch of hogwash, because Paul is going to commend Lois and Eunice for doing what to Timothy? For teaching him. He's going to commend them for teaching. And we're going to look at some other verses later on about some other women who were teachers in the Lord's church. So that's a bunch of hogwash. Women carry a great deal of importance in the Lord's church, and even among the leadership of the Lord's church, based upon these verses here, because of the importance that Paul places on the wives in verse 11. There. Any other comments, questions, concerns? All right, verse number 13. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a good standing and great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus. Verse 13 is the idea of I hate to say, well, here's the reward of serving in the role of a deacon, but that's really what verse 13 is. Here's the reward, the benefit of serving in the role of a deacon. It's really the idea of one of the rewards, one of the benefits of serving as a role of a deacon is you obtain a reputation of good standing. You build up a good name in the Lord's church. You build up a good name also in the community, right? If you do it properly, you show the ability to stand with great boldness. And remember, you go back to verse number 9, holding fast the mystery of the faith means you're willing to stand up and you're willing to defend the gospel of Christ. That's the idea. And all of this builds and it fulfills some of the qualifications of a what? Of an elder. It's building to that idea. It allows you to grow. It allows you to grow in skill and understanding. It allows you to start to navigate the ins and outs of the church. And start building on that leadership role, because as we've talked about, many deacons will go on to serve as a what? And will go on to serve as an elder. Many, many deacons. I would imagine that if you ask deacons, would you like to be an elder one day? What's the response you're going to get from many of them? Yeah. Yeah, we do want you. Now, are there some deacons, what? You did say yes, right, Kelly?
No, I said no.
You said no? Elaborate.
The deacons that I know are comfortable with these being deacons. There's a small percentage that are willing to be elders because they know what the responsibility is.
Okay. I could agree with that. I was actually getting ready to say that. There are some who they're happy with deacons. They don't want to move up into that role of being elders. But I think there are some deacons, they want to be an elder. They want to move in. You're absolutely right. It's because they know the responsibilities. that go into being elder, they're willing to take on. It's significantly more responsibility being an elder than it is being a deacon. And we understand that this is one of those stepping stones. I do know a couple of deacons who they have no desire to move on up and be an elder. They're happy with what they're doing. They have no desire whatsoever. But I also have known some in the past where that was their goal. They wanted to be an elder. They desired to be an elder. And we're going to go over a little bit because I want to finish this section today. But that goes back, and this is actually exactly where I wanted to close, because this goes back all the way to verse number 1. What was the very first qualification that we see to be an elder? Desire. It's something that you have to desire or want to do. And this is where it starts. This is where it starts. You build that, start building up those qualifications, and I'll be completely honest with you that I know of a man. He was an elder in the Lord's church. I believe he has stepped down since his wife passed away. But he became a gospel preacher. And you know the reason that he told me, the reason he became a gospel preacher. Now, at the time when I first heard this, I thought, how selfish when he said this. But I want you to think about it for a little bit before you make that judgment call, because that's what I did. One of the main reasons that he became a gospel preacher, which eventually led to him being a deacon and an elder, because he wanted to make sure he got himself to heaven. Now just think about it. That we're going to close. We're out of time. Lord willing, we'll pick up here next week, verse number 14. We'll continue looking on down for this. I appreciate the comments, the participation. And we'll take a break and enter into worship here in a few minutes. Thank you.